Good evening. You're either listening or watching Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with special guest Dr. Aaron Donaldson. And we are here to discuss national political news of the day. And there is so much going on. It's really hard to talk about it. But of course, we have this election next week, and all of the news we're going to be discussing hinges around that. We will talk a little bit about our predictions, talk a little bit about the House and Senate races as well, and whatever else we have time for. But really, the big issue is the presidential election. Now, once again, I think we're told this just about every election, but once again, we're told that this is the most important presidential election of our lifetime, and it may very well be. We may not even know, depending on how the results are, whether it was, in fact, the most important one, because if one candidate wins, well, maybe democracy won't end. But if democracy ends, we know this was the most consequential presidential election of our lifetime. And of course, everybody's hoping that when he says he's going to end democracy, he's just kidding and lying about it. But he does say, hey, you won't have to vote anymore. Laugh, laugh, laugh. And there are a lot of questions as to whether or not the system of checks and balances can survive another 4 years of Donald Trump in office. Well, we may or may not find out next week. But in the meantime, I wanted to start by talking about his closing argument. He went to New York, not a swing state or a battleground state, but New York City, to go to the Madison Square Gardens, claims that there were almost 22,000 people present in a venue that supposedly has a capacity for 19,000. But anyway, he was he's making it up or telling the truth and put everybody in potential fire danger. But I'm, being a little bit cynical there. But some really strange things happened there. Now, he wanted this to be, the time that he makes his closing argument. But unfortunately, he had a few guests that had some strange things to say that have pretty much possibly had an impact on his election chances. Now, we have the usual Giuliani talking about how Palestinians are trained to kill Americans at 2 years old. We had Tucker Carlson. I think I get what he was trying to say, saying that if she's elected, she would be the first Samoan Malaysian with a low IQ. I think the point was like he's trying to show that she can't decide what she is or something like that, but it really wasn't delivered well if that was the intent. And the low IQ part, that raises some questions. Then there was another guy waving a cross around saying that she's the Antichrist. And I mean, but the real the one that has made the headlines is a comedian who came and said some interesting things about Black people, but the headline maker is one that in which, for some reason, and it doesn't even kind of make sense in the scope of things, is that there is a floating pile of garbage in the ocean. It's called Puerto Rico, and although the Trump people are distancing themselves from this joke, people laughed. You can hear people in the audience laughing. Maybe not all of them, but definitely people close to the microphone. And this has caused a little bit of a fallout. And there are Puerto Rican voters who said they were going to vote for Trump and are deciding not to this time around, as if it took them this long to figure out that there's this kind of a problem. Anyway, this is what we're talking about, because this is what happened on Sunday, and we are still talking about it today. Now, of course, the president, it was a gaffe, but he made a comment that is reminiscent of Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables, in which he said that he referred to Trump supporters as garbage. It was a gaffe. We know that he does them, but maybe they should have not let him out for the last week. Who knows? But the Trump campaign is trying to make some hay out of this. I think everybody knows that he's prone to gaffes, but it was not something you want to say. So, final week, we're talking about basically insults. Vance says basically Puerto Ricans and everybody else should just chill out. It's not a big deal when people tell racist jokes. Maybe it's racist, maybe it's not, he said. I don't know why it's taking him so long to figure that out. But here we are, and but there are a lot of Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania, certainly a lot in Florida and other states. Aaron?
So you heard 22,000. One Republican Party member at some point said it was like 50,000. The one thing I know for a fact is it was the biggest crowd that Madison Square Gardens has ever seen. Period. Uh, the spectacle is the point. It is not a campaign rally. It is about a display of power and showing who gets to set the terms for politics and how those terms are going to play out. When we look at Tucker Carlson's comments, I think I have an explanation for what he's doing. When he calls Kamala Harris the first Malaysian Samoan, he is explicitly invoking the right to like misidentify people of color. They do this when they make fun of her name and refuse to learn how to pronounce her name. And in refusing to acknowledge her heritage, what they're doing is saying we can make a joke of this person's identity. He calls her low IQ. This is explicitly misogynistic language. She is incredibly smart. She passed the California bar exam, something you might know a little thing about. She is one of the most impressive candidates for president of the United States that we have had. She is one of the best qualified candidates for president of the United States that we have ever had. The Republican parties themselves went from critiquing electing Barack Obama as the quote teleprompter president to electing a reality show host as president of the United States. And their solution is to, one, set the terms to be such that you can use racism and misogyny, the same way they used misogyny against Hillary Clinton, to dismiss her as a meaningful candidate. But I think really the move here is when he says that they expect us to believe that she's so impressive that she gets 83 million votes. There is a running thread in the election denialism camp from the Trump administration that says there's no way Joe Biden got the number of votes that he got because just look at him. They say he's so terrible. And to be honest, I am not the kind of person that would, run over a pile of coals to vote for Joe Biden in most instances. He's not my candidate. He's not super impressive. But what's driving his numbers is not a bunch of people who are Joe Biden fans. What's driving his numbers are people who are abjectly terrified of a Donald Trump presidency. And they will never acknowledge that. And so what they do is they create this idea that there is like election interference, that there's tampering, that there's false votes, and they use those to drive up the numbers of a candidate who otherwise could not win on their own merits. Tucker Carlson basically says that we are expected to believe that Kamala Harris, the first person elected from islands and countries we don't respect, a low IQ individual, is so impressive. He says they'll call us a criminal if we don't acknowledge that. This is basically saying that when the election happens, if she wins, they should be able to say she doesn't deserve to win and to try to take the election the same way they did last time, and that should not be criminal behavior, that that's the way that we should all view the outcome of this election, because obviously she's so unqualified to be candidate. Tucker Carlson is, a known malignant threat on our news landscape. This Hinchcliffe person is a kind of like roast edge comedy guy who's having a day in the sun. And right now he's being Googled more than Taylor Swift, apparently, and just driving up his value for making abjectly racist comments. People can say that there's a debate about what's racist and what's not. As a debate coach and someone who studies communication for a living, I can tell you that it's, pretty straightforward what's racist and what's not. And calling Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage is abjectly racist. The jokes that he made about Latinos and Latinas is racist. The watermelon comment is racist. He's basically, quote, attacking everyone to kind of push these boundaries. And he wants to be able to have a world where he can attack those people and we're not allowed to criticize him, or that's, quote, woke culture. And that's another big part of their brand. Donald Trump can say that those jokes don't represent him, but he does not disown the mindset that drives those jokes. He, in fact, platforms it in front of 20,000, 50,000. There's probably like 180,000 people in that building, would be my guess. Maybe 2 million people in Madison Square Garden would be a good guess.
I mean, and just real quickly, they vet these things. They knew what he was going to say.
Yeah.
I mean, if they didn't, then that is incompetence beyond measure.
Yeah, if you're the president of the United States and you have a platform at Madison Square Gardens, you should be pretty selective about the people that you put up there. And there is a report that Hinchcliffe wanted to use the C word in reference to Kamala Harris, and he was told by the Trump administration, do not do that. And because we know that that is true, we know for a fact that they looked at his material. It's possible he ad-libbed this, and that would be surprising if he wasn't making the same joke the night before at a comedy club. There's reports that this is like a regular part of his routine. And if you follow this guy, you know what he's all about. And that's where it takes us back to the fact that a fundamental part of their brand is being able to say racist and misogynist things. And when other people say you should not do that, they decry woke culture and say they're the victims of a mob. And so they're basically showboating the ability to set the terms as racist and misogynistic, that the election is going to be stolen no matter what. The comment about garbage from Biden is mind blowing to me because people still think about Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables and Biden calling people garbage. Trump is talking about radical left wing lunatic enemy of the state, rounding up and deporting people. That is all red lights, blinking alarm. By those standards, calling someone garbage is relatively benign. Calling someone a basket of deplorables sounds like Mr. Rogers compared to radical lunatic leftists and the politics of naming that we get from the Trump administration.
Yeah, but
What
we
we
know
see,
that there's a double standard. Trump can be Trump, right? Trump is just being Trump. Anybody else, it's that's horrible.
right. And again, for me, what it is about, what it seems to be about is kind of what I say, setting the terms of the conversation. Basically saying this is the line of reality that we're going to live on. And it is a reality where everyone that doesn't support us is an enemy of the state. We can otherwise call ourselves a very loving movement because we love all of the people with Trump flags. It's just big heart love. Everyone loves each other, friendship bracelets, and all of that. We're a loving politic, but when it comes to the enemies of the people, we need the biggest deportation program ever. If you think that that's racist, if you think that we are misogynist, then you are woke, and that is the real threat. The election is going to be stolen unless Donald Trump wins. These are all fundamental narratives that are needed to prop up Trumpism. As a movement that relies on idolatry, dismissing, disowning, and demeaning the others and the people who push back, is a fundamental tool. The question on everyone's mind is, does this cost him? Everyone's reporting there's like 500,000 Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania, and that could have a big impact. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Do you think this is actually going to be something that moves the needle? Because I'm skeptical.
Well, the whole thing is the needle doesn't have to move very far because Pennsylvania, at least if you believe the polls, is a dead heat. Like, either one of them is ahead by 1 point or not. And so if that affects 5,000 votes, I mean, that could make the difference, right? It's hard to say, but mostly it takes him off message. He wanted to talk about this triumphant, biggest rally ever. Not even close, by the way, but biggest rally
There was like
ever at
8
Madison
million
Square
people in
Garden.
that building, Eric. That's what I heard was like 8 million people. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, 8 million people. Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, kind of like the clown cars, I guess, right? Or the
Yeah.
in Magic. But anyway, I mean, he wanted that to be what we were talking about. So it takes him off narrative. Then he has to actually distance himself from the guy, throw the guy under the bus. That tells me that there was a lack of calculation. I think they were playing red meat for the audience, and hoping that would turn more people out, saying, "Oh, how brave they are to say this." The problem is that the joke isn't even funny, right? I mean, it doesn't. It's purely for the shock value of saying it. It wasn't like it's a part of there was any lead up to it or anything that even gives it a context for it being funny, other than just saying it. And of course, he's not at one of his nightclubs where select audiences come. He's at a political event, and people who will speak at these types of rallies are presumed to be speaking on behalf of them. Now, again, I saw a lot of Puerto Ricans. I saw an interview with one who said he was going to vote for Trump, changing his mind in Florida. right? Will if it has an effect, it'll basically be to encourage Puerto Ricans who might not have voted at all to come out, and that could make the difference. I don't know if it's going to change too many votes. I think that gentleman was an exception, but if it motivates Puerto Ricans who remember what he did and didn't do for Puerto Rico when the hurricanes hit, it could make a difference in a close election. The problem is with these close elections, you don't want anything like that because it could be a whole bunch of factors. Did Comey kill the election for her? Well, it had to be really close to begin with. So any one of about a dozen things can be said to have made the difference. It's just not where he wanted to be following that rally. And now he's probably upset because yesterday at the eclipse in Washington, D.C., she had 30,000 people, by all counts, in an open venue. That's the biggest rally, not in history, people were saying that, but the biggest rally since Obama Portland 2008 of these types of rallies. And bigger than his. And I think that's the way she planned it, to be able to say that. And that's something we know gets on his nerves because that's what caused him to say they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs when she said that people were falling asleep and leaving his rallies. So, is it the factor that will be the silver bullet? No, can't be. But in a close election, it could make a difference.
The only reason I'm skeptical is because such a big part of Trumpism is seeing someone do the abjectly cruel, racist, inhumane thing and say, I still support him no matter what. And I feel like that's just true for supporters, whether they're from Puerto Rico or not. I feel like the ability to rationalize this is the same as anything else, but we'll see.
I love those pink signs. Women for Trump. I love the signs behind me. Blacks for Trump. I like those signs. Blacks for Trump. You watch. You watch. Those signs are great. Thank you.
All right, next subject. There were editorials prepared, endorsements of Harris prepared at the LA Times and the Washington Post. This is something they do regularly. I forget which paper, but one of them has been doing it since 1976. And they had vetted and put together these endorsements, these opinion editorials that were going to be published. And then at the last minute, the owner of the LA Times interjected, I'm forgetting his name, and said, no.
Bezos.
What's that?
Bezos, sorry.
No, Bezos is at the Washington
The
Post.
LA Times, I have it, sorry.
Somebody named Dr. Shun, I think.
Sun Xiang. Yep, there it is, Sun Xiang.
Yeah, and in both cases, they nixed him. Now, I honestly don't think that these editorials make a big difference. I'm not even sure that newspapers, Patrick Sun Xiang, thank you, that they should even do it. Maybe, newspapers should have no friends, be neutral, and the rest. And if this was a decision that was made 6 months ago, or a year ago, where the new owners of the papers said, we want to take a different direction here. Let's stay out of it. That would have been one thing, but what it looks like is that these editorials were going to be saying some pretty intense things, and they just didn't want that. Theory is that Jeff Bezos is worried about federal investigations against him, and does not want to turn Trump off. And Trump has made threats against these newspapers. He wants, of course, New York Times versus Sullivan reversed, by the Supreme Court, and he wants to is threatening to take their licenses down. Los Angeles Times, the daughter put out a rumor that it had to do with Israel Gaza, but they quickly put an end to that, saying no, this was just, we don't want to be in the editorial business of selecting a president. I don't have feelings about it one way or the other than it sounds like these were some pretty intense the editorials that got nixed basically because they're afraid of Trump. It's hard to and that is chilling. And there have been 200,000 cancellations of Washington Post subscriptions since Bezos pulled that. I think that's kind of the wrong way to go. I think if you want to cancel something, cancel your Amazon Prime. That's where where it would hurt Bezos. But the question is are the major newspapers, are they now basically the hostage to oligarchs? Because that's what these owners are acting like. I don't know which newspapers are public corporations as opposed to being owned by a single family, but definitely this is not the Washington Post ownership that we all saw in the movie The Post that allowed for the Watergate investigation to happen despite and publication of those. Definitely a different time, a different era, and it's kind of scary as far as I'm concerned. But you're a media expert. What do you think?
Yeah, it's very much not The Post anymore. It looks a lot more like Secession. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that show, but it's definitely worth viewing if you're interested in this kind of question. I think that on the should there be op-eds for presidents in the newspaper, I think there absolutely should be. I think that if there's going to be an opinion section in the newspaper and they have opinions on things like movies and stuff like that, we ought to be able to expect news people to aggregate information and give us their opinion, clearly labeled as such, on who they think should be president of the United States. And I think that these legacies help us understand what the priorities of those outlets are. Historically, you've been able to rely on like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times and all these other papers as having a particular voice in journalism. And of course, they will say under the guise of journalistic values that they're objective and they only report the facts. But we all know that every news organization is going to have to set and frame stories, pick and choose the stories that they're going to tell, and that creates a political tilt. And one of the ways that we've been able to assess that tilt and interpret that tilt is through these kinds of op-ed pieces. I think that in an age when people are reading these periodicals, then these could have a pretty significant impact. Now they probably don't. Not many people that are on the margins voting wise are turning to these outlets to get their information. I think you're right. The timing is incredibly alarming. If they would have said that they were doing this 2 years ago in the middle of a non-election or even in a midterm election, I'd be like, that's a little uncool, but okay. It's your paper. You can do whatever you want. Doing it on the eve of an election, in part because of what the paper was going to say. We know that the papers were going to endorse Kamala Harris. We're pretty sure that, like other papers doing so, it would be with fairly alarmist language. As you said, Trump is threatening media organizations that criticize him with revocation of licenses and all of these other kinds of things. He's being very explicit about that as part of his priority. I think Bezos in particular is worried about that, but I also think he's worried about Trump's relationship to Elon Musk. I think that this hurts him with his rockets as well as with his media. Musk has X, Musk has SpaceX. I think that everyone is trying to play both sides of this, and that is very, very alarming. What I would say, though, is that the LA Times, the Washington Post, these are fairly antiquated modes of people gathering their news. I am far more interested in the transition from Twitter to X and now. Folks were talking, I was watching the other day on something that I've just been wondering about. There was an article last time around that Twitter was suppressing information about Hunter Biden's laptop because they didn't think that that was like warranted news material during the election. And that was an amazing scandal. Elon Musk has since purchased X and is now jumping up and down on stage with Donald Trump at multiple rallies and explicitly throttling information on this platform in order to point people towards Trump. Only 12% of American media consumers get their news from X, but 12% is a number that any one newspaper could only dream of. Like that would be, if 12% of Americans read the Washington Post, then they could lose all those subscriptions and it wouldn't be a problem. The problem is they don't have nearly that kind of reach. And so this is a big story for legacy media. I would say that, like, when you look at the influence that Fox News has had, in particular, like all the way back to the W election, calling that election as early as they did, interior conversations referring to Republicans as our guy leading up to and through subsequent elections. Oligarchs controlling our media certainly isn't new, but I think what we're all learning is that most of the legacy pieces, and indeed from Meta to X, most of the social media places that we get our news are owned by billionaires. And when it comes to having debates, having arguments, rooting our conversations in facts that we all share and we agree, and this is devastating. I think people talk about the election of Donald Trump being the death of democracy. A big part of that is going to be this ongoing atrophy of the media, and we're seeing it right before our eyes.
Right. I mean, the thing I have to say though is even the legacy media basically makes use of it. The of the social media. Probably very few people would have actually read a hard copy of the editorial, but if it was particularly well written and particularly relevant, it could get spread around pretty quickly. And people, you'll send it to your Trumper uncle who probably won't open it, but you send it to him saying this is.
That's what people are sharing on Meta and X when they share news. It typically links back to the Washington Post, so eventually
exactly
back to it.
But it is chilling, and you're right. They own the with. By the way, I don't know if you knew this, but when Musk is jumping, you notice it looks like he's doing jumping jacks. Yeah, he's making an X. It's an advertisement.
I saw this on Reddit the other day, and it absolutely blew my mind. And on the one hand, I'm like, I guess that's a good idea. And on the other hand, when you look at it, it is just not working.
Yeah. No, and I'm getting people angry that people are calling him Hitler. When his vice presidential candidate called him Hitler. I mean, it was just back when he was at least pretending to have a brain. There's just there's so much to discuss here, but it is disconcerting that this control is being asserted. And again, they probably, if it was just kind of a standard endorsement, well, we support her on the issues, blah blah blah, it probably wouldn't have happened. But I think the hard copy got to Bezos and to Dr. Xiong. And they probably said, no, we can't do that. No, Trump is too powerful, win or lose. That is disconcerting. That is already having an impact. And now I'm going to find it hard to trust either paper in terms of their news coverage, because I don't know when the oligarchs are going to step in again.
I continue to turn to Democracy Now! As one of the most important sources for news in my life, mostly because they tell us what their politics are. They own that they are a progressive news organization, and they're not like fair and balanced. They're like, these are our politics, and that's going to impact our news, and so we'll just own that. But also because they continue to be funded by users, and I think that is integral. If news wants to remain objective, truly objective, you can't be a profit-driven entity run by shareholders or billionaires. You have to be entirely dependent on your readers, and you have to be able to maintain that kind of symbiotic relationship between giving them meaningful information and the kind of news that they want to read. There are very few news organizations that do that. Those are obviously not the primary news organizations that most people turn to. For me, it was losing the Wall Street Journal. When Fox Corp bought the Wall Street Journal, I just remember thinking this is going to fundamentally change one of the most reliable conservative sources in news that we've had for decades.
Yeah.
And it absolutely did.
Yeah, because the analysis used to be, I remember in the 1980s, a professor telling me this, is that they are providing information to investors. They have to be accurate, or that mission can be compromised. And now that's not even, it doesn't seem to be on their radar. Some of their articles are still good, but a lot of it isn't. Yeah, I mean, I go out of the country. I mean, BBC, Guardian, and the rest. There are some controls over those media, but it's not a singular oligarch that can do it. That's why I use the term oligarch in this. It's not the boardroom of the board, trying to come up with it, because they probably couldn't reach an agreement to do something like this as decisively or early. NPR, I listen to them. It's there, especially on our local zombie station up where you work. But I'm not going to pay for it, but I'll listen to it. Anyway, it is, we can find decent news. There's places out there. There are people, investigative reporters that use X actually. It's just, and there is always alternative media, but the mainstream media, that says something, and that is disconcerting, because the New York Times might be low compared to X or Facebook, but it's high compared to Democracy Now! In terms of the listenership.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'm especially worried about is there was a Washington Post article today that came out and said the sad truth is nobody cares about the Washington Post. And in it, it points out that the approval rating of the media, in particular the news media in this country, has officially dropped below the approval rating of Congress, which is the absolute floor of approval ratings as far as those things go. And what this means is that more and more Americans just see, quote, the media as this one big lump thing, and it cannot be trusted. And that is absolutely devastating for democracy. Democracy runs on a free and fair media. The First Amendment is there for a reason, and it is so we can continue to spread and share information and use that to determine who we will vote for and the kinds of policies we support. And what's happening, in part because of a very organized effort, but also just in part because of conglomeration and profit, is that Americans are starting to see all of it as something that cannot be trusted. And I think what's really hard as an educator, as someone who studies the media, is to tell people, on the one hand, these are kind of quasi-historical times, but on the other hand, the media has always been run by capitalists and governing people, and this has always been what it is. And a good media diet is just that. You've got to be grazing from lots of different sources, and you need to be aware of what goes into those sources. And people get exhausted with all of that. They just want to read one or two journals and call that good. And that's, that sounds nice, but that's not how we think when it comes to the media. There's got to be, a savvy consumer who understands that you can continue to read the Wall Street Journal and you can continue to read the Washington Post, and maybe you should, but not for the same old reasons. And also just to kind of, really make it about broadening a media diet to find as many different kinds of media sources as possible. That mandate for the consumer has never changed. And it is arguably easier now than it's ever been. I worry about how, organizations like Comcast and things have control over what we can engage with online. I think that's very real. But generally speaking, I think the internet does give consumers and people who share information that other people want the edge. It's those likes, it's the shares, it's the attention that these major media companies need, which means if you can provide that, you're going to have an edge up. And that means there's lots of places to go for good media. It's okay, and people should be suspicious of these kinds of moves, but we can't say that it's like all of the media now is bad. That's what I worry about.
Right. No, and to attack the media generically is inherently authoritarian.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Playing into this trope that you can't trust the media, you can't trust the masses. The masses and the media, these cannot be trusted. That is very alarming language.
The goals are the same for all Americans.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
Governor Reagan, as a matter of fact, began his political career campaigning around this nation against Medicare.
There you go again.
And I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
If Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life.
Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
Okay, our last segment. Well, this is our last show before the election. Next week we'll be discussing at least the returns. We may not know who won a lot of the elections, including the presidency. We just don't know. Although with all this early voting happening, it may be that everything gets tabulated and we do know on election night. We'll see, because they are breaking records in voting in just about every state, even states that are not where the presidential race isn't as big a consequence because it's a foregone conclusion, sort of. But we're seeing big lines in Pennsylvania. I don't like Pennsylvania's early voting system. It's pretty minimal, and when you see big lines this late, that's suppression. That's not necessarily good news. That means that people are driving by saying, "I don't have time for this," and hoping they're going to get to vote closer to election or on election day. That's not good. But it does show that there's a lot of interest out there. Normally, I would say that, a large turnout benefits Democrats. It usually does. Not always. We had one of the biggest turnouts ever in California during the recall election, and progressives definitely did not benefit. Democrats didn't benefit. That was the election of Arnold Schwarzenegger. So it's not necessarily true that if you call an election and everybody comes that the Democrat is going to win, but it probably is good news, at least in some of the states. And there's a lot of talk about whether or not the polls are going to be accurate. I'm going to hand it off to you because there's so much to talk about once I talk about this, but we've talked about the Trump effect in 2016 and then again in 2020. The polling average underestimated. I think that Biden was supposed to win by 7 or 8. He won by 4. Clinton was supposed to win by, I don't know, 5 or 6, but she won by 2. We're talking about the national vote, and really messed up in the states, although they were close enough that they were within the margin of error, but it's but then as we've discussed on this show, every election, special election since Dobbs came down, the Democrats have not necessarily won, but outperformed the polls. And almost all the elections in 2022. I bring up one big one of Fetterman. The polling average had him down by 2 points. He ended up winning by 5. That's a 7-point difference between the election and the margin. So the question is, and there are theories out there that the pollsters don't want to make this mistake a third time. And since 1972, it hasn't happened a third time. They may be overcompensating for the Trump effect, missing the Dobbs effect entirely. And it may be that she wins by a landslide. Or the same things are happening because they just can't seem to track Trump voters, and Trump wins by a landslide. Or it's close, and one or the other ekes it out. We don't know. This is probably one of the biggest mysteries elections I've ever had because I can't predict it. I'm having a hard time predicting the 7 battleground states because you can make good arguments for how each one is doing better than the other or than we thought in each of those 7 states. I will provide my final prediction as to how those 7 states are going to go, but it's a lot of it is guesswork.
It's really hard to figure out. When Trump was elected the first time, I was still on social media, and I was, following, friends with dozens and dozens of debate coaches all over the world, and many of them were like former national debating champions, and All of them are now people that are very invested in politics and very invested in knowing, the best arguments for what to expect for the future. And they all got it wrong. We all got that one wrong. And it was just the most disorienting moment to be so sure of something and to see it come back with such a surprising result. And that is really truly the one thing giving me the most pause right now, because I feel like if you were to ask me what I think is going to happen, I would say Kamala Harris is going to absolutely destroy Donald Trump in this election. Every indication that I've been trained to look for in 20 something years of intercollegiate speech and debate, following every election and midterm election in between, with like week by week by week obsession so that we can try to win Lewis and Clark arguing about it. Like every bit of knowledge that I have says that Trump is just getting wrecked, that her rallies are bigger. The commercials that this person is running, if you're watching the Yankees get paddled by the Dodgers like I am right now, they need to finish the Yankees. This needs to happen. But if you're watching that, the commercials that Trump is airing for that are incredibly distressing. They are incredibly racist. They're incredibly transphobic. I really worry for my trans friends, my family, because the language is obsessive and it is threatening. And the polls continue to be close. If you ask me my prediction, she's going to destroy him. The problem is when I look at my argument, it's not backed up. Every poll that we have has this razor thin margin with him leading within the margin of error or her leading within the margin of error. And nobody knows what the numbers mean until after the fact. That's the hardest part, is that, right now we're seeing reporting from Bloomberg that in 3 key swing states, the GOP is outperforming. This is Arizona, Nevada, and North Carolina. The same study says that she's up in Pennsylvania, and that's a big one. And, it's like the margin here is so small. The early voting could be swamped by day of voting. We have done so much to suppress the vote in this country, but in theory, that affects pretty much everyone the same. And so it's just a question of intensity. And the one variable that I think is kind of up in the air, I haven't heard enough people talking about this, is that I think more and more Republicans are turning out to vote, but not supporting Donald Trump. I do think that you're seeing a larger coalition of people who are Republicans. Make no mistake, Liz Cheney is a Republican. Like, that is what she supports. And like, she cannot call herself an independent or a Democrat because those parties will not have her. Like, this is just not who she is. She is a Republican, and she is registered to vote, and she is going to vote. And that will show up in these early polling numbers as a Republican coming out to vote in higher numbers. But it's not a vote for Trump. Yeah, and I think that could be impacting some of these things that we're seeing right now. When they ask in the polls, who are you going to vote for? Then I think they get to the bottom of that. But some of this party affiliated voter numbers that we're getting back, we're just not sure. And at the end of the day, how many people go and vote and actually do vote for Trump, we won't know. The last bit I'll say on this is that I've been having these moments recently where I acknowledge the fact that Donald Trump could be elected president in a week or so. And it's very jarring. It's incredibly jarring. It's like my knowledge and my faith is in that Kamala Harris is going to win, and this country has a soul, and we will continue to pursue democracy. But history does not care about my feelings on this, and we're going to go down a fork in a road here. And I think more of us need to be ready for what facing that reality is like if we're going to be prepared for it when it happens.
Yeah, it's hard because my mother looks at the polls. She watches everything maybe a little too much. She's 85 years old, and she is worried. She said, maybe this just wasn't the right time to nominate a black woman. I mean, it's just she's really scared about it. And it's but there is reason for optimism. One thing we've learned in the past week is that Trump's get out the vote effort is a joke. They hired people who were actually lying to them about how many doors they were knocking on to their own campaign, because it's not their campaign. Whereas hers is exceptional in most of the states. Questionable in a couple. Are they really getting their votes out in Georgia? What's happening with Clark County? But as some experts have pointed out, once Trump gave his voters permission to vote early, the tendency before the pandemic was for conservatives to vote really early, like the day they get their absentee ballots early. I mean, and that was my experience working on local campaigns. We'd be calling in to Fortuna. Once the ballots were out, they would say, "Oh, you're too late, young man. I sent out my vote today," right? So it's so it was bound to be conservative or Republican heavy early on, and that needle has moved since then. It's a lot closer in Nevada right now. It's a few exceptions. North Carolina, the Democrats were ahead. Now they're about even. And then there's, of course, this big block of unknown voters that, we don't know what they're doing. But I suspect that if there's a lot of voters that are not registering specifically as Republican or identifying themselves that way, clearly, they're probably not voting for Trump. There are over 200 prominent Republicans who have endorsed Harris. I think you can count, maybe 4, and one of them just switched parties, isn't even a Democrat anymore. She's, on the campaign team. The other is Blagojevich. I noticed they haven't had him at any rallies. I wish they would. I think he just got out of jail, a year and a half ago. I mean, there aren't a lot doing that. And you go on to the comments on YouTube and the rest, and I see a lot of Republicans saying, "I'm voting Democrat for the first time in my life." Is this all anecdotal? Is there, or are there these unknown voters? On the other hand, saw interviews with black voters in county. I'm forgetting the name of the county just south of Atlanta, and although it's expected to go at least 80% to that county to Harris, there are black men saying, "I just don't think a woman is emotionally capable of handling the job." We need, and one of the women was right there saying, "You're worried about her emotional fragility? Look at him, for crying out loud." I mean, it's just we don't know. There is talks that the black vote is going to be more heavy towards Trump than it has been in the past. It did improve for Trump between 16 and 20, but does that move it? Does that mean that instead of 90%, she wins by 88%, or does it mean she wins by 83%? 83% is a problem, 88% not so much. But we do have this get out the vote. I am encouraged by what I see on YouTube, all anecdotal, of course, but Philadelphia big lines today, and Clark County is starting to get its vote out in Nevada. But like I said, I just don't know. We can't know, but I would say stop paying attention to the polls at this point. Pay attention to the turnout and where it's happening, and then hope that maybe there are 10% of Republicans that are going to vote against this.
Yeah, I appreciate and understand why people have doubts about this being the time that we picked to run a black woman or whatever. I think that's understandable. This country is sexist. This country is racist. We saw it with Hillary Clinton for sure. And I think that it's a reasonable thing to worry about. But Kamala Harris, I think, has built the biggest coalition in politics that we have seen in my lifetime. Like, this has been a masterful campaign when you look at the short period of time that she had. And as a candidate, I think that she excites demographics. She doesn't just get people on board to vote. She fundamentally pumps up very large demographics of voters that are going to come out and vote for her because it's the most exciting thing that could happen to them. And I think we're seeing that. And it's possible that all of that is just a glaze on already non-competitive elections and things. And it's all pretty meaningless. But the one thing that would really be hard to stick with is this idea that it was, because Kamala Harris was a black woman that Trump beat her. I think that there are a lot more other reasons that are at play. And, for my money, I too have optimism in what you're seeing. Like, watching Liz Cheney and Kamala Harris campaign together was surreal. That was a very surreal moment. And the only explanation I've been telling people, it kind of feels like America versus something else. Like, there's a part of America that is fighting to save democracy, and then there's another vein of something else that calls itself America that does not want that reality to come to pass. They want to own the story of what is and isn't America, and the people that don't belong, don't belong. As Miller says, America is for Americans only. that's a very explicit code about who belongs to America and who does not. And it feels like finally, hopefully not better late than never, but finally, the Republican Party has realized there is something that you can fear more than a Democrat, and it is another Donald Trump presidency. They did not learn that the first couple times. They didn't learn it in 2016. They did not learn it in 2020. Hopefully, they have learned it with enough time for us to turn the boat. We'll see. There's really just waiting to find out. I think that, everyone's saying we're going to have to wait until the numbers come in. Biden won on November 3rd. It wasn't until November 7th that he was declared president. I think, Trump is going to, everyone is saying Trump is going to make every day, every delay, every possible moment an open battlefront on trying to push the election his way, no matter what happens. So it's something that's going to draw out for another couple of weeks. I keep hoping by like Christmas we'll know who's going to be president. We should know by then.
I think we'll know by then. But definitely, Liz Cheney, some interesting things. There are people who are kind of been traveling along with her, and the rest who say she's starting to sound kind of Libby on things. They say that a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. Well, she kind of got mugged on January 6th, right? I mean, there was a moment where Jim Jordan was trying to take her arm, trying to be the man to lead her to safety, and she pulled away from him and said, "F you caused this." I mean, that was a big moment in her life that, and sometimes it has a long-term effect on their ideology. It could be that she is actually moving to the left. We'll find out because she'll be writing about it, obviously, as the time comes along. But she's smart. That's the thing. She's got critical thinking abilities. I just hope that she reverses herself on torture someday. That would be nice. And
the legacy of her father's contribution to the W administration. Like when she was introduced and they said the daughter of Dick Cheney, she tried to get everyone to clap, and everyone was like, no, we don't really clap for Dick Cheney. Like that legacy is catastrophic. And if Liz Cheney is starting to sound like a liberal, it is simply because she's finally getting accountable to what conservatism is doing and the kind of double standard that they've been playing forever, where Democrats are the worst thing to happen to America. It's just not true.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. Aaron, what do you have?
I don't want to go so far as to predict the election. I've already said every bone in my body says she's going to win by a lot. But the one prediction I am going to make is I do think that Harris can win Pennsylvania. And I think it's possible that's a backbreaker. I think that the Puerto Rican demographic in Pennsylvania is very, very large. I think that, there's just a whole lot of things in terms of like the early voting results that we're getting in Pennsylvania, the ground game that the Harris administration dedicated there. Like they went to war for Pennsylvania. And I feel like if it's gonna tip somewhere, that's the place that it could tip. And that's very good for the Harris administration. I don't know if it's enough. We'll see. But that's my prediction.
Well, I think whoever wins Pennsylvania is going to win the election.
I think so too.
It's the bellwether there. I do believe that she will take Michigan and Wisconsin. I think that all the signs are there. So if she can win Pennsylvania and hold on to Omaha, she's got it. Hopefully, if there isn't some weird thing that happens.
If she loses Omaha, that would be amazing.
Yeah. If it comes down to that, right. I last week was sort of skeptical, but Arizona, I think the conspiracy theories have just motivated too many people to vote for Trump, and with a little bit of the conservative Latinos deciding they're going to vote their social values, I think it's going to be really hard for her to win Arizona, unless, again, we're totally wrong and there's that blowout. I do think Clark County will deliver in Nevada. And Georgia, I just don't have as good a feeling about it. There's great turnouts, but Republicans are ahead. It's also one of the few places where men are still a little bit ahead of women, but I do think there's a possibility, but I'm going to call that one for Trump. North Carolina, I have no clue. There's just too many indications that it could go either way. I do think the Democrats are going to lose the Senate and reclaim the House. So that's, but again, everything is too close to call. Well, we'll find out, and we'll definitely have to have you back, Aaron, at some point to discuss this, like within the next month or so.
More and more
but
people are invoking the great newsman with the sign off good night and good luck, and it just sounds that much more appropriate at this point.
there you go. Well, anyway, stay informed and stay engaged. We'll see you next time.